if the way you show up is my dog and I are going to do this, you've shown up differently and your dog does too. So now you're in partner mode, and that deepens the bond. You talk about oxytocin and bonding,
Right.
but it also builds confidence for them. And they now show up as a partner, and that builds trust. And now you're both loving the adventure.
Episode 1078, Krista Halling on how to properly adventure with your dog. Krista Halling was on the Adventure Sports Podcast 7 years ago. Actually, it's 7.5 years ago, almost 8 years ago. And it was when she and a friend, they boated the Thames River 250 miles. It was pretty much a source-to-sea adventure. And so that was episode 313 back in 2017, if you'd like to hear it. It was really, really cool. But today she's here to do something that I think is going to be so valuable for so many of us. She is a veterinary surgeon, an outdoor adventurer, and a founder of dogpacking.com. And this platform blends veterinary science with real-world adventure tips for people who want to explore the outdoors with their dogs. And dogs really, I think, can make the best adventure buddies, but what I've learned the hard way is we have to know how to care for the dog and their needs. I mean, when we're doing a big adventure, we're pushing ourselves really hard. I think it's easy to forget that we could be pushing our dog even harder than we know. So Krista is here to talk about wonderful adventure dog stories, why adventure with dogs, but more importantly, how to do it right so that your dog can enjoy it and continue to adventure with you for many, many years. So, Krista, welcome to the program.
Curt, thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight to be back in the seat.
Oh, well, it's fun to have you back. I tell you, when we talked about the Thames, that was a long, long time ago. I just remember thinking about how fun it would be to see England from the water and in that way. And you really inspired me to think about travel in new ways. But that's not why we're here today. Let's start out by telling everyone where you are today and where we're talking from.
Sure. So I'm from the Toronto area, just outside of Toronto in Canada. So my joke is we're still waiting for the snow to melt. It's the beginning of June now, but we're getting there.
Wow. Well, I live in Gunnison, Colorado, and Gunnison has a microclimate that makes it one of the coldest cities, if not the coldest city in the lower 48. So I feel like I'm right there with you. We still have snow, but I saw snow in the trees, kind of at elevation over the weekend. But down in the valleys now, it's beautiful and green. But I'm with you. It seems like winter just hangs on a long time, doesn't it?
It sure likes to. It's nice when you can see winter. It's just when it comes and finds you that I don't like it as much.
Right. And it's the wrestling match for me between winter and summer. We don't really get spring. We just get a wrestling match of the seasons, and then all of a sudden it's summer. Is it like that in Toronto?
It is, although summer is fairly short here. By the time it starts, you're already kind of making sure your winter coat's not too far away
Oh,
because the
no.
countdown's begun. Well, we're pretty far north, right? So
Well, I want to get to the dogs because that's what this show's about, and I'm super interested in all the dog stories and the hows and the whys. But let's start. Why do you do adventure with your dog? And your dog's name is River. Tell us about River, and then why you do adventures with River.
yes, River's a mini golden doodle. She's about 4.5 years old. I didn't name her after the Thames, despite the coincidence there. Um, but actually, I named her after the desire to do outdoor adventures and water sports in particular with her, and thought, oh, I'll give her the name River because that's kind of fun. And there probably aren't too many
Nice.
dogs that will come in a dog park if I'm shouting River. And she's lived up to that. I exposed her to running like swift water pretty early on. When she was a puppy, we sat beside rapids and such and hung out in the water, and she loves it. She learned to surf a couple of years ago in Mexico. The the surf instructor said, well, I suppose I can do a lesson, but I've never actually taught a dog before, so I can't guarantee anything. And I laughed and said, I have zero, zero expectations. I'm just glad that you'll have her as a student. So
Nice. So, when I think about having a dog on an adventure, I often think about companionship. especially if I'm adventuring without another human, having the dog along adds a depth to the experience. Has that been how it's been for you too?
Absolutely, Kurt. It makes you see the world and see the experience now a bit more through a dog's eyes. So not that
Mm,
you're going to be like looking at every fire hydrant that you pass, but they live in the moment and they're usually so happy with whatever you're doing with them. Within reason, you've got to be careful, and we'll get to that. But as you go along, you now have this companionship mindset. If you show up that way, then your dog shows up differently as well. So they say emotion travels up and down the leash. And it's so true. There's science
mm,
behind that. So when you show up with like, rather than, hey, I'm going to go and do a trail run or I'm doing an adventure, and oh, by the way, my dog's coming along. If the way you show up is my dog and I are going to do this, you've shown up differently and your dog does too. So now you're in partner mode, and that deepens the bond. You talk about oxytocin and bonding,
right.
but it also builds confidence for them, and they now show up as a partner, and that builds trust. And now you're both loving the adventure, and sometimes it actually just is kind of more fun sometimes than bringing a person along, to have your dog, because again, they bring you to the moment where you're actually now enjoying the stopping and sniffing the flowers, and that helps your dog a lot to slow down and to sniff and have that experience. But it means that you're doing that too. It's not about the destination. You're not rushing through it. You're enjoying having your furry best friend by your side. And for River, she's about 20 pounds in the past, so 10 kilos or so. In the past, I've had like more regulation size dogs, but I've
Okay.
downsized. I got the travel edition. 20 pounds is about the sweet spot for bringing them in an airplane under the seat, like in a backpack. So
Okay.
yeah, so for me, that's worked out really well. We do a fair bit of international travel together, and yeah, she comes along, she folds up, gets in a backpack, and I've got a folding bike. And then when I get somewhere, I unfold the dog, unfold the bike, and off we go.
Oh, that's great. I've often been curious about what are best breeds for adventure dogs, and when I think of an adventure dog, maybe you and I can brainstorm here, but the criteria that I think about are a dog that's strong enough that would enjoy being outdoors and is really good with movement and overcoming obstacles. Maybe able to climb a mountain with me and get up a boulder. Um, but I'm not sure, and this is where your expertise comes in. Is it better to have a medium-sized dog or a large dog or a small dog? I mean, what kinds of dogs seem to have the best stamina and to fit with human-sized adventures?
Well, you're asking all the right questions. And what I would say to that is to work back, probably if your listeners think about what are they going to be doing on a pretty regular basis, not the aspirational trip, but like on a regular basis. And the reason
Yeah.
I say that is if they picture sort of like, oh, maybe one day I'd like to do this, and they go and get a dog that's capable of something, and because they have a ton of energy and they need to get out there, and that would be good for that particular trip. If that's not what your listener is doing most of the time, that dog may not be the best fit for the rest of their life, if that makes sense, like for all the other
Yes.
days that they're not doing that. So if you take a super high energy, super motivated working dog, herding dog, for instance, they need to be doing something pretty much all the time. So just keep in mind, like, what is your life realistically, not aspirationally? And I do this too, right? I sort of work back from this. What does your life realistically look like? And it's fine if there's a bit of aspiration in there, but you want to keep it fairly real, and then work back from that. And I would say, you can build a dog's fitness up the same way you build your own fitness. So you don't necessarily have to start with a breed that is already a super fast runner, for instance. But you probably want to avoid breeds that are likely to get themselves into trouble with the elements, or if you have something small, maybe you can put it in your backpack when you're climbing up and over things. But breeds that I would be cautious with are the flat faced, the short nosed dogs. They have a
Mm,
huge problem getting air in, which is a problem for an aerobic standpoint, but also a big problem from a cooling standpoint. Dogs already are very disadvantaged from a cooling efficiency standpoint. We've got all of our skin a huge surface area that we can sweat through and cool ourselves, and we don't have the burden of all the hair. Dogs have
right.
the hair, and then all they have really is their tongue, effectively, and moving. The panting is moving air back and forth, a bit like waving a fan. That's what that does. It waves a fan over their tongue to evaporate to evaporate water and saliva. Really, really inefficient. So if you take that and then you go down to a dog that has an even harder problem with that, which are the short-nosed breeds called brachycephalic, short-faced. Those are the ones I probably would stay away from if you want a life of adventure. But otherwise, go and do some research on sort of personalities. And as much as I love mixed breeds, it's a bit like getting a smoothie. You've got a bit more control over what your dog's needs will be, what their temperament will be, and how to let them thrive if you work back from the attributes of purebreds, if that makes sense. So even
Yeah.
a mix like my dog's golden retriever and poodle mix, and so already I had a general idea of what her needs are. So she turns off very easily, and then she turns on easily when we're doing something. She's got a lot of drive, a lot of energy, but she doesn't go stir crazy when we're in between adventures. If that makes sense, if that answers
It
your question.
does. Some things I've also noticed. I've generally had dogs that were bred for herding sheep or cattle. Most of my life I've had herding dogs, and they're always trying to be with you and keep you in the right place, so to speak, or keep the group together. And then I've also had friends that adventure with dogs that were more bred for like a hunting. And the hunting dogs, they want to be in the bushes and they want to be zigging around looking for a trail somewhere, and they'll take off after something. Whereas my herding dog is constantly coming back to me. I don't have to worry about, is he going to run away and I'm going to lose him? The hunting dogs, they'll run away and just be gone because that rabbit is real. So what about that kind of a thought? What they were actually designed to do?
Yes, no, that's a really good point. So there was an excellent episode recently for those who listen to the Huberman Lab on behavior of animals, and they talked about pets in particular. And it was a really good breakdown of the prey drive. Like there's the focus of let me pay attention to something, and so herding breeds have that. Let me pay attention and let's do the roundup. And then there's the let me zoom after it, and then let me grab it. And so terriers, they have nose to the ground and off they go for things. And then there's
Yeah.
other breeds that are designed to do the final grab of the prey. And so that sort of speaks a lot to like the retriever in River. She won't necessarily go and do anything to an animal, but she certainly loves chasing a ball, right? That's her thing because it's the
Right.
retrieving part, right? So you can certainly work back from how's that going to look and what sort of activities, and they can just be parts of the adventure or little bits of the day that are going to speak to and align with what your dog's bred for, because that's probably where they're going to get a lot of satisfaction.
Interesting. So it pays when you're thinking about getting a dog to actually spend some time on this. Do some research and what's the behavior? How much energy does the dog have? Are you like you said, are you getting the dog for the adventure you'd love to do or the what you actually do? Right. And I think all of that is fascinating. Let's swap some dog stories just for fun. Do you have a story about you and River where you were just like, I am so glad that River was here for this time?
I do. And some of it's a bit funny. I was glad she came along because there's a whole lot of learning that happened. And that was the first time that I took her on a bike touring trip.
Okay.
So yeah, so River and I, she was about 2 at the time. So I'd known her for a couple of years, which, to a dog, that's like 14 years.
Yeah, long
um,
time.
yeah, and then off we went, and the trip we did was fairly hilly, and it was at altitude, and it was actually in Colorado, like leaving the Boulder, Denver area, trying to
Okay.
head up your little molehills there. And
Yes.
I trained for it at sea level. So, era number one. I did all the newbie mistakes. I hadn't done a whole lot of touring. Um, so I show up, and the practice that I had done with River was I didn't add the water. I didn't fully load the bike. So I was just
Right.
practicing River on the bicycle and hopping in and out of the little basket and such. And then I take that had gone from some sea level training, take it to altitude, and and then fully load up the bike. And as a lot of your listeners probably know, touring bikes are super heavy, and at speed maybe they can be pretty stable, but when they're going slowly that gets really
Mm,
wobbly.
yeah.
So I'm already in first gear, my lowest gear, and I haven't I'm just approaching the hill. Actually, I haven't gotten to it yet. So I've already like all my cards. I've, I've dealt my last card and I'm already super slow. So the bike's now a little bit unstable and River's sitting behind me, in a little crate on the rear rack. And she's
Okay.
wondering, why are we going so slowly? This is really boring. I just can't go any faster. So she sits up and she starts looking to the left or the right of me, trying to look ahead to see
Yeah, what's going
what's
on?
taking so long. Exactly. And that just destabilized even further. So yeah, so we toppled, but honestly, I was going like half a mile an hour. You could have walked past me. So she was perfectly fine. The leash is long enough that she can hop out and clear the bike, and it was pretty obvious we were going to go down in slow motion. But I was so glad she was with me because it just made the experience like that much more fun. And it also let me sit back and deconstruct that into, okay, there were a few new things here. Getting used to like doing something with the dog on the bike, I probably should have gotten further along before adding a whole lot of stuff, and maybe gotten better with hills before taking it to, to a new level of Colorado level, for instance.
I've got to share this story, Krista. It just popped into my mind, and it was amazing to me. It was one of those experiences that makes you say, wow. So I backpacked 7 miles into a wilderness area, and my back went out while I was sleeping. And I'm not trying to make a story about my injury, but suffice it to say, it took me 3 hours to get my backpack on, and that's not an exaggeration. And as we were hiking out, there were no trails, and we came to a bluff. And I looked up this bluff, and I just thought, there's no way I can get out of here. I am truly in trouble. I'm stuck. And as I stood there, just bewildered, thinking that we were the only people for, 10 miles or something, a black lab came running out of the trees, ran up to me and looked at me and barked one time and turned around and ran again. And I thought,
Wow.
what's going on here? I'm following that dog. And that dog led us to a trail that had switchbacks and allowed us to get out of there.
Oh my gosh, that was your hero kind
That
of dropped
dog
down almost from the
saved
sky.
me. I
Wow,
mean, I
wow,
was at the
wow.
point of sending someone out to get a helicopter. But
Yeah,
because
of
of that
course.
dog, I was able to hike the 7 miles back out, and life was good. And I am so thankful. Never saw who the dog went with. Were there other hikers there? I don't know. Never saw them. All I know is that dog showed up and said, "This way."
They have that extra sense,
They
don't they?
do.
And
It
they
knew
don't,
that I needed help. I don't know
yeah,
how, but it knew
yeah,
from a distance, and it came and found me. And that's something about adventuring with dogs that I think is so amazing, is they really are watching out for us.
they are. And they also don't kind of lose it in times of stress. Like we're so good at thinking ahead or thinking behind, and you're sort of already
Oh,
thinking, which you sort of need someone to be doing that to a certain extent, the planning ahead. But they're able to stay calm and they're like, well, why don't we just go this way? Because this is the exit.
yes.
So it's so good. They stay so grounded. That was awesome. What a
Well,
great
here's a
story.
question for you too. Talking about hiking and backpacking with dogs. There's trail etiquette when it comes to dogs. And some people really get annoyed about dogs on the trail because a lot of people are very uncomfortable around dogs. And the dog owners, of course, are comfortable with dogs. They have dogs. That's why, it all works. But can we talk a little bit about how we can use proper etiquette on the trails so that it's a positive experience for everybody?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's so easy as a dog owner, you're going out there and what you're thinking of, and I do this as well, is, hey, do I are my dog and I doing something like within our abilities and that sort of thing, but you're
Sure.
really not thinking about the effect of what you guys are doing and how you're showing up on others that are already, that are experiencing the trail as well. And so that's where leash leash laws or leash regulations come in, which,
Mm,
a lot of people ignore. And if no one's around, I sometimes do as well. But what it means is that if recall is only recall to a point. You actually don't have physical control of your dog. You've got
right.
verbal control. And you might think, and this is what happens a lot that maybe you came across is, oh, don't worry, my dog's friendly, as this huge dog comes like bounding up to you. And it's not being intent, like it, in a way, it sort of doesn't matter what the dog's intent is, because maybe that person just doesn't want another dog coming bounding up to them, or maybe that dog has a reactive dog. So, I'll have my dog, let's say, on a leash, and another dog off leash comes running up to say hi. The owner of that other dog has no idea whether my dog's friendly. Maybe I have her on a leash because she's not okay with other dogs coming up, right? And that's where you
Hmm.
just, you've immediately said goodbye to some control when your dog is off leash. And I think you need to realize that even if most of the time they come back, you just don't have that control. So things like leave no trace, poop bags and clean up after your dog. And then just be aware that not everybody wants a dog sort of coming at them. And so behavior is important. I think leash, if it's a trail where realistically you're probably going to encounter someone, even if your dog is friendly and they're not far from you, that still might be enough to like disrupt how pleasant the experience is for someone else. Or you've got someone coming pretty quickly on a trail and the dog isn't really thinking and steps out in front of them, for instance.
Right.
Or some people run with retractable leashes. Which I find the term is, if you know those, it's sort of like a plastic handle device with
Yeah.
with
Spring
with
loaded.
with cord, a
Yeah.
spring-loaded cord, exactly,
Sure.
that can be tensioned. They call it retractable, and I think that's a funny term because you cannot retract that.
Right.
It's like a fishing rod without a handle on
You
the
can't reel your
reel.
dog in.
You can't reel the dog in,
No.
exactly. And what you need to hold, the leash part of it is a cord. And that cord can like sear through tissue really. Like
Oh yeah.
I've actually
Yeah.
got a scar on my hand from when a retractable leash did that. So they only retract when whatever's at the end of it, when the fish decides to come back, right?
Right.
So it's still limited. It's limited control. It can actually injure your dog if there's too much slack and it's on the ground and your dog steps in like one of the
Right.
loops, for instance, and then it tensions, that can cause a lot of injury or a broken leg, for instance. But the other thing is they're really hard to see. And suddenly if a runner or a cyclist comes zooming along and your dog's over there and you're over here and they don't see that they're about to go, clothesline themselves on a retractable leash. So I think, probably the key for people is to think, how are you and your dog showing up and how might that however that is, how might that interfere the experience that other people on the trail are having, and just be mindful of that.
Yes. There's also the mindset of I know my dog. My dog doesn't bite. So you meet somebody and your dog is barking ferociously and you say, "Oh, don't worry, he doesn't bite." They don't know anything about your dog, right?
Of
I mean, their
course.
adrenaline is spiked through the roof and they're thinking I'm about to lose a leg here. When you know your dog's going to be nice, I I've seen different habits, and in Colorado, when you're away from the front country, when I say front country, I mean the heavily used trails. Most of those are leash law trails, but when you get away from that, where the trails aren't so heavily used, then usually the rules are on leash or under voice command. Well, the under voice command doesn't help the other hikers a whole lot because they don't know your dog. And it's not an insult that they don't know your dog, right? That's another thing. I've seen some people that will hike with a dog off leash, but if they see other hikers in the distance, they'll go ahead and clip the dog into a leash. And I think, wow, that's kind of the best of both worlds. They're being considerate of me, and the dog is still having a great time when no one else is around. In a way, that makes sense.
Yes, that's a pretty good happy medium, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that where there are fewer people, there's probably a higher concentration of wildlife.
Sure.
And those
Yeah.
encounters, may be not good for the wildlife, not good for your dog. So sort of keep that in mind if you're in snake
All good
land or
points.
fox land or skunk land or porcupine territory or bear
Oh,
country.
goodness. Yes. I had one experience, Krista, that I wouldn't have thought of until I experienced it. And then I realized, and I'm going to throw it out there because maybe this will help somebody. We were climbing a 14er with our dog, and he was doing a great job. But there is a little bit of like a class 3 scramble area, which the dog was fine with, not a problem. However, there were other climbers on the mountain, and the dog would knock a rock off because dogs aren't aware of what the rock does. And as soon as I saw that my dog was headed into loose rocks, I was like, holy crap, I can't let my dog do dog things here because the rocks are going to hurt somebody. So we pulled out some webbing. We tied a harness that we could put on him, and so we could keep him with us, and we could use the harness even to safely lower him down something that he would have run through scree to get around, but we couldn't have him in the loose rocks. The point is, I didn't anticipate that the dog might become a hazard for someone else without even knowing it.
What you did do, because things can come up, right? I don't think you can necessarily cross every T and dot every I fully in advance, but what I'm hearing you did was you had that on your radar and you paid attention to it and you responded to it.
I think maybe that's the lesson there is be aware of your dog and what's going on situationally. Right?
Yeah, exactly. For your dog's sake, for other people's sake as well. For sure. Because you could
Mm,
have still had blinders on and not even really paid attention to the fact you're like, oh, my dog's okay, without thinking, oh, your dog's not really thinking about gravity. Well, it's thinking about gravity from its standpoint. It doesn't want to go
right.
down with it, but it's not thinking about anything within the rock fall area. So that's great that you
Okay.
did. Probably
Well,
the
we've
same.
talked to.
I don't have human kids, but I guess the same if you're out with your kids, right? Just
Oh, sure.
kind of
Yeah.
pay attention to the effect that your kids might have on others.
Well, and you hear people say, "Could you get that kid on a leash?" They don't mean literally, but there's a parallel there
Well,
sometimes. So we've talked about the joy that it can have, the companionship, and even dogs can help us, right? Not to mention service dogs, which is a whole other subject. But that the companionship and the joy of having the dog, and just knowing that there's something we care about, another being there that's experiencing this with us. I think all of those things are so special. I've also known people that have chosen dogs because the dog offers a modicum of protection. They feel like if they have a dog, then people are less likely to maybe do untoward things.
yes.
Um, there are lots of reasons to have dogs on adventures. We've talked about that. We've also talked about a little bit of the whys, but I I guess where I'm headed here is I think I overdid it with a dog once or twice, and the dog paid the price. And we need to know how to do this in a way that works for the dog. And this is where your veterinary science comes in, and your website. It's like, how do we do this correctly?
And that's actually the basis for the fordogpacking.com, because I realized when I was starting to do things with River and I had questions about these, like there actually isn't a resource that's a dedicated resource with science-backed information on how to safely get outdoors and do things with your dog, like beyond your front porch. It doesn't even have to
Mm.
be grand adventures, but a lot of people, may not know where on your dog do you look for ticks. And it's not that that information's not out there. It is, but maybe that information will be over here, something else will be over there. When people have questions like, does my dog need sunscreen? Where do I look for ticks? Can my dog drink Gatorade? I'm going to put all that together in one spot and blend that in with activities that people can do just to give them some inspiration to get out there. And you exactly touched on like the why, and we talked about the why for the person, but the huge why, and then we'll get into like how to maybe set you up and your dog for success, is that bringing your dog along, getting them into green space, getting them into nature and getting them moving does the same thing for a dog as it does for a person. So it really increases their health span. Dogs have that too, right? We talk about the lifespan. My dog lived to be 15 or 16, for instance, which is great. But then you think about the other consideration. What did those years look like?
Right.
And so health span is the how long your dog is able to be mobile, is able to be healthy, physically and emotionally, like their cognitive sense as well. And so getting them out there, moving, being connected with you, and doing stuff in green space, which just stimulates them a lot more, just like us, than walking around in on a concrete area. And also when you're in green space for a dog, if they're barefoot, which hopefully most of the time they are, and we can talk about booties or no booties in a bit, it's giving them feedback to their sensation. So their paws have a lot of receptors, just like us. We can feel things, and there's something called proprioception, which is the ability to know where your body parts are in space. So it's
Right.
like you can close your eyes and still clap because you can feel where your hands are. So getting that feedback doesn't happen if a dog's walking on concrete because it's pretty plain. There's really not much that changes,
Mm,
and doesn't teach them to misstep. It doesn't stimulate that. And really your nervous system and and a dog's proprioceptive ability needs, it's a use it or lose it situation. So getting them out in nature where they're even walking, for instance, like, should we walk through the park or should we walk along the sidewalk? Go for the park, get them on the grass, because it's giving them, it's less concussive than concrete and
right.
asphalt and pavement, but it's also giving them feedback to their body parts. And that actually helps keep them as they move forward in life, keeps them balanced, keeps them from misstepping, keeps them from being injured. So that's one of the benefits as well. And
That's
just
amazing.
mentally, it's so enriching for them.
I've heard studies done that say that one of the best ways to fight dementia as a human is to walk on uneven ground. As strangely as that sounds, studies have established that there's a correlation there. I never thought about it for dogs, but what you're saying is your dog needs to walk on uneven ground because that builds dexterity for the dog.
Completely. Taking your dog, and again, this doesn't even have to be a grand adventure, although probably a lot of your listeners are already planning their next trip with their dog and are thinking about like what bike to get next. This is a really good excuse to get a new bike, by the way, for those who need to mention that to their spouse, because I'm taking the dog. But yeah, even if you sort of look at, oh, my daily walk is just sort of around the block and that's on sidewalk. How about if you tweak that just a little bit? Super powerful. Show up with your dog. My dog and I are doing this. And then I'm going to see if my dog can walk on the green space as long as like neighbors aren't coming out. Get off my lawn, you know.
Right.
But try to get them on that. Try to get them on some single track, something a little bit uneven. It's good for the person as well. But you know, the episode, I'm the dog advocate here, so we'll focus on that. It makes a huge difference to your dog, to your dog's physical fitness, to your dog's mental fitness, cognitive fitness, emotional fitness. And there's science behind all of this. It's super, super powerful. And it doesn't even have to be that much. They're sort of like, oh, that walk in the park can do a huge difference compared to walking on the sidewalk around the block.
Wow, I never would have thought of that. Now, here's another thought. I know that as dogs are growing up from puppy to adulthood, they have growth plates. They have joints that are getting stronger and all that sort of thing too. And you can overdo it with a puppy, I guess is where I'm headed with this. At what age can you say, okay, now your dog's developed enough that you should be able to start training for the adventure?
Yeah, and you hit that on the nail, developed enough. And that's just it. So with puppies, they're still developing. Their nervous system's developing. Their bones are still growing. And you mentioned growth plates. So those are little areas that still remains as cartilage. And if you picture a two-layer cake with some icing in the middle, the growth plate is like the icing. So it can the two pieces of bone on either side can sort of slide around, and you can break the growth plate very easily. And
Yeah,
when that
okay.
happens, that's what lets your body, your bone elongate to be longer. So
Right.
it's not so much, it depends on how much is left to grow, of course. If you picture someone rolling out a carpet, if you're almost done rolling out, it doesn't matter if the carpet stops probably. But if your dog is younger, so maybe just a few months old and has a lot of growth potential left, and is a bigger breed, which means they have more to grow. A Chihuahua, you
Right.
can damage a growth plate in a Chihuahua and it may not look all that different because it doesn't have that far to go to begin with. But what can happen is not only could the limb maybe be a bit shorter, but the bigger problem is often if it's crooked. So if the growth plate gets damaged but not evenly, part of that bone continues to grow and part of it no longer grows. And
Oh, wow.
now you get something that turns right at Albuquerque and you've got a leg that's pointing the wrong way, and that causes huge morbidity, huge consequences to the dog's mobility, and often needs surgery to reset that. So all that is to say, yes, you do need to be more careful with puppies. The hard and fast rule that will probably be good and conservative for people taking their puppies out there is 5 minutes per month of age, if that makes sense. So, if the puppy is 2 months old when you first get it, it can probably do a 10-minute walk. And you want to keep things non-impact, like non-concussive. So walking is fine. I would do soft, like grass, for instance, or trails is a little bit better for their joints than walking on sidewalks, but it doesn't mean you can't take your dog on a sidewalk, but just, keep that in mind. Don't let
Sure.
them jump down from tall surfaces. That's concussive. That would be a problem. And don't try to to build up their endurance by pushing them. With us and with dogs, when you try to condition them, you want to push them beyond the point where your body's like, oh, that was hard. I'm going to build myself up so that next time I do that test, I'm going to pass the test, right? That's how we build fitness, by increasing speed, increasing duration, increasing difficulty level. But then you need a bit of a rest period, and then you come back and do that activity again, and you get stronger and stronger. I probably wouldn't try that with a puppy. So stick with sort of maybe 5 minutes per month of age. And then no jumping down. Allow a little bit of free play is fine, but don't try to push your dog. Safest point is honestly wait until they're about 1.5 years. Some growth plates close sooner than others. Development happens sooner than others in some dogs. And
Okay.
so some people say 12 months, but you're probably a bit safer to wait closer to about 1.5 years, at least for the larger breed dogs. And then walking around on grass and on little trails is actually pretty good for their proprioceptive system to develop as well.
Mm. So I had a dog as a young man when I was a teenager. I lived on a farm. This dog was one of the strongest dogs I've ever known, and he would run beside my motorcycle all day long at 25, 30 miles an hour. And I thought, wow, dogs are amazing. What I didn't realize was that he was unique and a very special dog. A lot of dogs could probably do that, but not all dogs can do that. And so when we got a dog, he got to be probably about his full height, but he hadn't filled in yet. So I'm guessing he's a little over 1. And I thought, hey, I'm going to go on a bike ride. I'll just have him run beside me. I turned around. I'm like, where's my dog? And I waited, and he finally caught up, and he was spent. He was truly spent. And I felt like such an idiot because I didn't realize. I just thought, wow, dogs are amazing. They can do all these things. But I think I overdid it. And I mean, he was very sore. And I thought, oh man, I wonder if I messed anything up with that. So I'm glad that you shared what you did. So you're saying at 1.5 years, probably on the larger breeds, the growth plates are safe.
Yes, your vet can take X-rays. There's a growth plate at the front of the shin that's the last one to close. But really, rather than going and like X-raying your dog every week to see like, can I
Right.
can I exercise it yet? Yeah, just be cautious till they're about 1.5 years and just build up slowly. But to your point with your dog, kudos for giving your dog such a rich and exciting life. Clearly, that dog has a ton of energy. But as you said, everyone wants to do well by their dog, and you kind of hope your dog does well by itself. But what can happen is they're not always the best advocate for themselves. So the fact that a
Yes.
dog is keeping up with you doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing okay, that it hasn't gone past the point of like, hey, I'm in the fatigue, I'm in the injury zone,
Yeah.
because there are two systems get to vote. The body gets to vote, hey, I'm really tired now, I should probably stop before I get injured. And the brain gets to vote. And usually the brain's in control. And if the dog really likes what it's doing, if it has that drive, especially like, I love chasing things, for instance, you think of the dog you throw a ball for, and it's like the game never stops. They're super tired, clearly, but they still bring the ball back and want you to throw it again, because the dopamine, the kind of like, I'm getting a rush from this, I really enjoy it, has a stronger vote. Maybe it's a 51% shareholder, and the body that is tired and should have stopped isn't the one controlling. So you need to be your dog's advocate, and just watch out and sort of don't do anything that's going to surprise your dog, your dog's body, or is much different than what you've done in the past. A good rule of thumb, I find, and I use this for River, is okay, is what we're about to do likely going to surprise her body? Is it going to say, oh, yeah, this is a lot longer or a lot faster or a lot harder than we've done before? And you usually can kind of intuitively know the answer to that by saying, nah, no, you know what? This actually isn't that much different. If you want to get a bit more nerdy, generally from week to week, if you're on a consistent program building them up, adding about 10%, not per day, but like from 1 week to the next,
Per
to
week.
the per week, to the
Okay.
speed or the duration or the intensity, to one of those. So what you don't want to do is say, hey, I'm feeling good today. Today, we're going to do faster, longer, and harder. Bad idea. And sometimes when you increase the duration, for instance, maybe you decrease um, how difficult it is. Like maybe we're going to go longer, but we're not going to do hills this time. We're going to do longer and flat, for instance. Or if your dog's been on grass, like something soft, or maybe a softer trail, and for some reason there's trail maintenance, and today you've got to run on the sidewalk. That is a much higher impact. So while the difficulty doesn't sound like it would be much because it's flat, it's just a sidewalk, that seems easy. It's it's more concussive and it's a bit harsher on your dog's pads than what they're used to doing. So what I would do then is, okay, we're going to do the sidewalk, but we're going to do, let's say, half the duration, right? Let's dial that down, for instance. And I hope this doesn't come across as like all the ways you can break your dog, because taking your dog on an adventure, honestly, you're more likely to benefit your dog than to injure it or do harm by any means. But there are some, I think, some big takeaways, and that's just to build up super cautiously. And then dogs aren't, on on day one of vet school, if you're wondering what they teach you, it's pretty much that we get different species and such, and they teach us like dogs compared to a human medicine, right? We have cows and horses and chickens and raccoons and peacocks. So they teach us that dogs are not furry people and cats are not small dogs. And when
Yes.
you learn that, and the idea being some of the principles are going to be very similar, mammal, that sort of thing, but there's a lot of takeaway that's very different. And that's where I think we can get ourselves a bit into trouble by just going with the default of like, oh, my dog's keeping up, or my dog can probably do what a person does, or I'm not feeling too hot right now, my dog's probably okay too. And with a dog, the an increased humidity, for instance, can do far more damage from a heat perspective than just a high temperature, because
Mm.
they need to evaporate, right? And so that's where they can get themselves into trouble. But
Wow,
largely they
there's
will
so
do,
much there.
yeah, you'll do
Say the
so
name
much
of your website
goodness.
again. And the reason I'm saying this is because there's so much there. People need to be able to go to the source and look into this more.
Thank you. It's called dogpacking.com. So dogpacking.com.
Okay.
A bit like,
Dogpacking.com.
yeah, you grab your dog, you grab a pack, you go at your front door and you have an adventure.
It's a wonderful thing to do. Excuse me. And I highly encourage our listeners to adventure with your dog, but remember dog etiquette. And I'm going to see if I can remember the rules of thumb that you gave us. Okay. You said 5 minutes per month of age for a puppy when you're doing some activity, some exercise. I'm like, okay, that's good. But above all else, pay attention to your dog because it's not going to be able to tell you what's going on. So that was a 5 minutes of duration per month of age. Then you said for a larger breed at about a year and a half, they probably will be able to start doing significant training because their growth plates, which should be fully closed, but not guaranteed. So pay attention to your dog. Um, you said increase the activity by 10% per week, but that's not harder, further, faster. That's 10% faster and everything else is the same, or 10% farther and everything else is the same, right? What did I miss?
Yeah, those are the good ones. And then, so gradual is a bigger thing. I wouldn't get maybe too stuck on the exact 10%, because if they do something on a Monday and then the following week they're like, oh, well, it's been a week, but they haven't done anything
Right.
for a week. So just increase it gradually, the same way a person would build themselves up. And just err on the side of like, I think my dog's had too much. If your dog starts panting heavily, it's either done too much and needs a break, or it's too hot. So the other thing is, keep in mind dogs overheat so much faster than we do. So make sure they have
Yes.
plenty of water. Exercise them beginning and late periods of the day, not during the heat, at least during warmer months. Be careful of that.
Right.
If your dog does seem to get hot, don't put them in super cold immersion. Like, let's go into this super cold glacial creek, for instance, if they need to cool off, because that actually, the skin is going to say, oh, it's super cold out, I need to conserve heat, even though their
Oh
body
no.
needs to get rid of heat. The same with a person. That's not the best way to cool
Right.
off. So just be cautious with that. The other takeaway that we haven't brought up is how many ingredients in trail mix are toxic for dogs. A lot of
Oh
people,
my. Yes.
yeah, raisins, chocolate, nuts. Yeah, raisins can kill a dog.
Wow.
Xylitol in sugarless treats can kill a
Right.
dog. So those are, yeah, those are the big no's. I think most people maybe know about onions, but they're not going to probably bring an onion on a
Garlic.
hike. And garlic, exactly. But yeah, so with the big concern with trail mix is it's so easy to, like, you just reach for some and you're a little bit tired and you pour it out and, like, oh, spilled some. And for dogs that are like treat motivated, you're looking on the forest floor for those raisins that just fell out and your
Oh
dogs
boy.
consume them. Yeah. So I try to not bring anything that, if it fell and River got it, would be the end of River. I just don't bring it along.
Oh, well said. And then I guess that just behooves us to say, well, let's bring something for the dog that is safe, that we know the dog will do well with.
Bingo. You got it. Yeah. I've actually, there is an article, for those who want to look more into this, there's an article on like common camp and trail snacks that are toxic for your dog. And then
Right.
it clicks to there's another one on like what you can bring that's fine for your dog.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, Krista, thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground really quickly, but I appreciate the information. And again, that's dogpacking.com, right? And I encourage everyone out there, if you're going to adventure with a pet, with a dog, take the time to do it right. Don't make the mistakes that I've made where I overdid it too much too soon with my dog. That was a sad day for me. So anyway, make sure you do it right. And Krista, thank you so much for being an advocate for the canines because they can't speak for themselves. We need people like you to tell us this is the way to care for your dog. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Curt. And yeah, and kudos to everybody who's listening, who wants to get out there with their dog. Like, just it'll be such a fun experience for you and the dog when you guys show up together and have those shared moments. And then instead of getting back from your trip and showing like your dog this photo album of what like of what you did on your trip and that they missed, like they were part of the experience too. So if you picture
Yes.
like the lifespan that that dog's having and those moments, it'll be, it's shared, and that's so powerful and so precious.
Well, I tell you what, the more that you're able to do of everyday life with the pet that you got to be with, the better, I think. The relationship is richer and the rewards are richer because you're with your pet instead of leaving the pet locked up at home all the time. So, anyway.
That's just it. The power of togetherness. You got it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's a great place to stop. So, for everyone out there, thank you for listening. Take care of your dogs and get out there and have some fun.